The views, statements, and opinions expressed in this episode are solely our own, including our guest, and these do not necessarily represent those of our employers.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Georgie.
And I'm VG.
Welcome to our podcast, Diversity and Inclusion, Satisfying the Tick Box.
Today's episode is going to cover menopause.
So just to give a bit of background on menopause, menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workforce, and the average age for a woman to go through menopause is 51. It can be much earlier than this though, from natural causes or due to surgery or illness, and symptoms may even start years before menopause as well. And according to the Faculty of Occupational Medicine, nearly 8 out of 10 menopausal women are in work, and 3 out of 4 women experience symptoms, and 1 in 4 could experience serious symptoms, which is why it's so important for organisations to provide those accommodations for whoever's going through this.
And in today's episode, we have 2 special guests. We have firstly Kylie Hope, who's going to share her lived experience with us and help us understand how menopause can affect women and the options available to help. Secondly, we've got Rachel Collins, who's a D&I leader, who's going to share with us a perspective from a D&I leader's lens. So welcome to you both. And can you give us a quick introduction to yourselves?
Hi, my name's Kylie, and I'm an EA at a relatively large tech organisation, and I'm really pleased to be here today to answer any questions.
Hello, I'm Rachel. I head up diversity, equity and inclusion for a tech organisation, and really passionate about this topic.
Thank you both for those introductions. I'm just going to start with you, Kylie. It would be great to hear from you what menopause is and why it's such an important topic to you?
Sure. Well, menopause, there's 2 stages of menopause. You have the perimenopause, which can start at quite an early age that the studies are now showing, but generally around your early 40s. So between sort of 40 to 45, you'll start getting what they call the perimenopause. And that's where a lot of the physical symptoms and mental symptoms start to come into play. And menopause is actually just one day. It's when you haven't had a period for 1 whole year. And on that day is when you actually start the menopause. And it's really important to me because I definitely have had a roller coaster throughout this journey. I started the perimenopause when I was about 42 and started to have symptoms. And I was very lucky. I had an extremely empathetic and understanding doctor at the time. And the one thing that the more you read and learn about this process is it's really GP lottery. If you have a really good GP, you get great support. But unfortunately, there just isn't a lot of support out there. So when I did move addresses and went to a different surgery, the support was diabolical, to the point where I actually had to get medication through friends in the interim of getting it all sorted. So it's important to me to do these sorts of podcasts and blogs and various other mediums, because I just want women to understand that there's so much support out there, and not just women, just anyone that's supporting somebody that's going through this. So, obviously it's the person themselves, but, it does really affect everybody around you. It can affect your work and it can affect your friendship. And, just there's so much information, and there's a really good support networks ranging from people who have got Instagram accounts, and this is from doctors, and, there's some really good bit of knowledge out there now that's a lot more up to date. Historically, the information that was available was quite scaremongering that, if you took HRT, you were going to get breast cancer, and it's so dated, a lot of that. There's much more recent studies, and, I feel that it's important for women to know that there's just a lot of support out there and the right treatment as well.
Thank you, Kylie, for sharing your personal experience. And we'll come on to, what kind of support and adjustments that there are. But I wanted to cover with you, you mentioned that there's physical and mental symptoms. Can you clarify and for the purpose of the listeners, just tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So physical symptoms, well, again, the recent studies are now showing that there's a lot of physical symptoms, but the main ones that I think that most women do get is you can sweat a lot. You um, you can be extremely tired one day. You can have a lot of energy the next day. You can get itchy skin. You can also have a lot of tenderness in your breasts. There can be also vaginal problems that you can have that people don't want to talk about because it's, quite a personal area that you'd want to discuss. But these things do become an issue throughout this journey. For not all women, I'd just like to add that not every single woman goes through the menopause. Some are quite lucky and they don't. Mental issues, it ranges from you can lose a lot of your identity and your security in your thoughts because you start you start to get forgetful, really forgetful. And I'm talking where you can question whether or not what are you going through? Is this early Alzheimer's or dementia? Then once you find out that you're going through the peri or menopause, you have a better understanding that it's part of this, but the forgetfulness. So then when you start forgetting things at work and you're not doing things up to this par that you would normally be, you start questioning. You think, well, am I good at my job? Am I good at looking after my children? Am I good at being a friend? So all these things accumulate to, just a lot of self-doubt and losing a lot of self-confidence.
That's so interesting, all of those symptoms, because I literally had no idea about any of those. So it's really important to talk about them. And I'm just going back to when you said about the treatment and you had to get your medication through your friends. Could you just share some of the treatment process that you've been through and kind of what support you get with that?
Absolutely. So when I first started getting symptoms, it was the symptoms that took me to my doctor was that I was having really restless sleeps. I'm really tired all the time, and then I went and had checks for B12 and low iron, and all that was normal, and started to get forgetfulness. So had a blood test, which is a standard procedure to find out if you're going through the menopause. You should have one, and then another one about 3 months later to check your hormones are altering quite a lot or not. And then I went on what they call the patches, and these are small patches that you put on either the inside of your thigh or your backside. And they worked for about 8 months, really good. Started to notice the symptoms subsiding. And then after about 8 to 12 months, I went back to my doctor and said, look, I'm starting to notice the symptoms coming back quite strong. So she said, well, try these larger patches. And they were enormous and they were very hard. And so they just didn't work for me. And at the time, my doctor was trying the gel, which is like you put on the top part of your arm and on the inside of your thighs in the evening. It's 2 pumps, and it's just like putting a moisturizer on at night. Because she was trying it, I thought, you know what? If the GP is going to be trying this, yeah, let me try this. Been the best thing that I've ever done because it's not like you have to take a tablet at a certain time of the day. I literally put it on in the morning before I put my cream and everything on and do my other beauty routine. And then in the evening, likewise, I get out the shower, put my gel on. And it depends on your hormone levels as to how many pumps you would do a day. But generally, most women do between 3 to 5, again, depending on your hormone levels. But when I changed doctors, the surgery that I went to, they just didn't have the education about menopause. And that's what's lacking in the UK at the moment. In a lot of GPs is the knowledge or any menopause specialists in that surgery. And because I've got a history of DVT, from a very routine operation 10 years ago, one of the pharmacists that works for my GP refused to give me treatment, despite me being on it for 4 years already. And it's proven that having a history of DVT now, you're not prone to get more breast cancer. You can be prone to getting any form of breast cancer, whether you're on the pill or whether you're on HRT. That the numbers are very equal. In fact, I think they're now proven that being on HRT, the percentage is quite low. And now every woman's different. So I'm not going to say that one woman that gets on HRT will not get breast cancer because I'm not a medical practitioner. But, that was my argument was, I'm prepared to take that risk and I just have regular checkups. But it took up to 9 months with several wrongdoings from the GP. Like they sent me to a gynecologist to get a checkup. Then when I got to the gynecologist, they hadn't sent my form, so then I had to come back. Then when I went back, they didn't have the appointment. So it was just a catalogue of errors through my GP. But I finally, we're finally in a good place now. And all of this, what didn't help was going on through COVID. So that sort of exacerbated a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety with going through the perimenopause at that point.
Thank you, Kylie, for sharing that. That's quite personal, and I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that there's not enough knowledge. What are the common misconceptions or biases surrounding menopause?
Oh, I think the big one is that your life stops and that, you're old and decrepit, and which is far from the truth because, there's so many different nationality, races, ages of women that are going through this that, yeah, it isn't easy. It is a process that you have to try and get your head around. And if you're fortunate enough to have a really supporting network, then it is a bit of a smoother ride. And if you're not, then it's pretty bumpy. But your life, you don't stop going to work. Well, hopefully you don't have to, but some women do. But your life does continue when you get the right treatment. And many women that I have spoken to at work and outside of work, I mean, I know 2 women that said to me that they were feeling even suicidal because they had no idea what was going on. Once they got the right support and treatment, how their life changes. And now, they look back and think, wow, God, that was really rocky time, but I'm on a good path now. And, I think getting the right treatment is quite crucial. And I think the conception that you're old when you get this and life stops, and it's just really far from the truth. And I think also that the cancer scare is very dated now.
I think that's why it's so important to do kind of podcasts like this and share your story, because
absolutely
it can help so many women to kind of understand it a bit more and kind of put it into real life.
And it also helps younger people coming through, that because at some point you're pretty likely to go through this. Some people don't, but there is a fairly high percentage that you'll go through some form of perimenopause. And we all stop our period at some point. Women do. So it's also preparing for because I've talked to my mum. I had no idea. It might have explained some behaviours when I was younger with her, but I just thought she was just my mum being cranky when I was younger. And, her mum probably went through it. And all those generations where they just didn't talk about, God, definitely didn't talk about, women's problems. Whereas now the world is becoming much more open. And I think having these discussions is allowing everybody to go through this process a lot more open, not so on their own and isolated. And just it allows the next generations coming through to prepare themselves better for it.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think it's also important around advice and having that support when you're younger. Is there any advice which you wish you'd been given a bit earlier on?
I suppose the advice would probably be that just to talk about a little bit more. And it's a bit of a catch-22, that one, because you want to talk about it because you're going through this, but then you don't want to talk about and say that that your brain isn't, you've got this brain fog, because that's what you'll hear a lot of women say, they have brain fog. I mean, you don't want to say that because then you wrote about, maybe your boss or somebody's thinking you're not performing that well. But you have to sort of speak up and say, look, I'm going through this process and through this journey. There's no sort of given time ending on this either. And I think the advice was just to do a bit of research, because I think there's so much out there now that's, as I keep saying, is very relevant. A lot of the information before was so dated. It was, if you went on HRT, you're going to get cancer. If you went on HRT, that means you're old. It's just so different, really. The information and the availability of what's out there is just far from removed to what the information that we've previously held.
Kylie, I want to tie this back into the workplace. And how can menopause impact you at work, and what's kind of the support or adjustments that is required at work for someone who's going through menopause?
Well, it can affect you a lot at work because this brain fog that women get. It's because you can be talking 1 minute and just stop and think, I don't even know what the next word is that's going to come out. And you hear a lot of women say that they just completely forget themselves mid-sentence. So you put yourself in a really important meeting and you're talking, and next minute thinking, I don't even know what I'm meant to be saying next. And you can do that once, but when you start doing it a couple of times, it's just natural behavior to start thinking, oh my God, what is going on? And then if you're not in a safe environment, you continue to try and cover it up. And it really can affect people at work, because you've got this brain fog. You're trying your hardest. Life is full of pressures anyway, and you're trying your hardest to do your gig right, and you can't think straight. So to have a company which supports you is God, it's worth its weight in gold, really.
Yeah, 100%. I think everything you've said is so informative. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, Kylie. It's been really, really great to hear. Rachel, don't worry, we haven't forgotten about you. We're gonna just move on to your kind of area. So what's your kind of perspective? What do you think the role of, say, managers or CEOs play in accommodating their employees with menopause?
Well, I think from my perspective, I really believe that inclusion starts from the top. So to have a really gender inclusive and also age inclusive workplace, this affects women from a certain age onwards. And the philosophy of the organization being inclusive, that does start from the top and cascades down, or should cascade down. But from the manager perspective, I think that what we have to remember is that this is a really personal journey, and it impacts people in many different ways. Some people get really severe symptoms, some people get spells of severe symptoms, and then times when it's not as bad. Um, it's just people get different symptoms. It's different for everyone. And so I think the line manager can play a really important role, because there isn't just one way to support somebody who's going through this. It really depends on the individual and what support they need. So it's really important to have that line manager relationship where you're able to share what's going on for you. And the line manager plays that role in making that safe space so that people are able to share what's going on with them, share their difficulties, share if they need any adjustments. So adjustments could be anything from, I need to work from home because actually I'm really struggling at the moment, or I would really benefit from having a fan on my desk, or if it's a company that wears uniforms, it might be the uniform is exacerbating symptoms. So it's really important that people are able to have those types of well-being conversations with their managers, and managers are able to understand and react in a way that's supportive. So yeah, I think that's really important to remember, that it's an individual journey.
I completely agree with you, Rachel, in terms of managers creating that open communication, but also transparency. You mentioned safe space, and also some of the adjustments that are made. And again, these will be tailored to each individual, as each individual's needs are different. But what I wanted to ask you is, do you think a lot of people feel uncomfortable talking about it due to the lack of knowledge? And you mentioned some of the support systems that have been put up in place. What are some of the initiatives that you've implemented at your organization, if you're happy to share those?
Yeah, happy to. I think people are uncomfortable sometimes in sharing what's going on with them, because it is personal, and because there is bias, and people will be worried sometimes sharing this information. Will it reflect badly on me? Will somebody um, act in a way that's not understanding and make me feel worse? People are worried about discrimination. And I think the key thing is making sure that as a workplace, it's very, very clear that the workplace aims to be inclusive and supportive of people going through this. And I think that's the first step in many ways, is make it very clear to managers that they have a duty of care to support their team members and make it clear to everyone else that if they're experiencing this, and they can expect support from the company. I think that the top thing is to just get talking about it. I mean, in the organization I work for, one of the first things that we did was we worked with our women's network to host some webinars where people shared their experiences, but also we heard from menopause experts who talk very, very openly about how the menopause can affect people in different ways, and also at work. And what was really interesting is that that was one of the organization's top webinars. We got really high numbers of people attending. We got a lot of men attending who were really keen to find out how they could support team members, but also in their personal lives, how they could support their wives. We had someone come on and share that he was aware that his sister was having a tough time and wanted to join to find out how he could support her. So what became clear to me is that there isn't a lot of information out there, or there hasn't been historically, and people actually do want to support each other, and the workplace can play a role in enabling that. So we started the journey that way. The other things that we have done is just make sure that we have champions, menopause champions in the workplace, who are people who have been trained to have that bit more knowledge, to offer a listening ear when people are struggling, and signpost to further help and support. I think that the point that Kylie made earlier, which was around how it's important to have a supportive company and a supportive boss, you want to make sure that there are those people in place that people can go and ask for support. So if they have a manager that they're not quite sure how to talk to them, they can go to a menopause champion and get support that way. So it's just very important to have all of those people in place that can offer that type of support.
I think it's great that you've got those champions and those people that employees would know who to go to if they don't feel like they've got anyone to talk to. But yeah, I think it's also fantastic that you put on a webinar and that so many people wanted to come and listen and join. I think because it's not really a topic that's spoken about too much, especially with men. So I think that's really great. And why do you think it's important to kind of manage the effects of menopause in women at work and kind of give them that support?
Well, I think you said earlier, Georgie, about how it's a fast-growing demographic within the workplace, women who are of the age where people go through menopause. And there are many studies out there that talk about women quite often considering leaving the workforce because of their menopause symptoms. And quite simply, we know that when people get the right support, they can stay and thrive at work. And so it becomes obvious then to me that if employers support people, then they're going to be able to retain people for longer, reduce absence, and we can attract women into the workforce if they know that they're able to be supported. It just sets the tone for an inclusive organization, and one that values well-being. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to make clear in terms of we actually at my organization set up a working group in terms of what we could do to ensure people were supported. And one of the goals that we outlined at the very start was that we want to make sure that people don't want to leave the workplace because of this. We want to retain people and retain great talented women. So yeah, I think that's the key thing.
And I agree with you, Rachel. You mentioned about creating that safe space so that they can basically bring their best selves to work. So finding the belonging at work is quite crucial, as well as allyship, because when you got allyship, it's that support network that's there for anyone who's going through that. They know who to reach, but also asking for help shouldn't be a barrier. Everyone should be comfortable to go and ask for that help. Have you seen any incidents where individuals were a bit afraid or didn't really know where to go for help before?
I mean, I have. I think over the years, though, I think it's fewer people are afraid to ask for support because workplaces are talking about this more and more. So, I've definitely seen a change and a positive one. But I also think that, I work globally and there are different attitudes towards aging and menopause and talking about personal things in work in different cultural locations. And I think that it's important to be cognizant of that, especially if you're a manager of a global team, to understand that somebody from um, a certain location might find it easier to ask for help than others. So yeah, for me, I think that definitely things have improved over time, but there's still work to do to ensure that as I said, we create the safe spaces, and that's not something I think that you can do once. That's something where you need to keep reminding people that the door is open and that you're there to support.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing your insights. And we're just going to wrap it up. So we always end our episodes with a key takeaway. So we're going to ask you, Kylie and Rachel, to share what would be your key takeaway for our listeners.
Sure. Thanks for this opportunity. I think my key takeaway from my journey so far is that don't feel that you're alone. There's thousands of other women going through this process, and you'll be surprised of how many people that you actually know are going through this. Do some research so that you can understand what the process is all about, and be persistent with your GP because they have to provide you with the right support. And the right support in the right treatment as well, because every woman is different, so every woman's going to need a completely different treatment program.
Thank you, Kylie and Rachel.
Very similar to what Kylie has said, actually. I think remembering as a key takeaway that people experience this differently and that there isn't one size fits all approach to supporting somebody who's experiencing menopause symptoms. The other thing that I would say, though, is talk about it. Menopause in the past has been seen as a bit of a taboo. And the only way to break a taboo is to be really open and talk about it. And that enables people to come forward and be able to be supported.
Thank you so much, Kylie and Rachel, for coming on the podcast and sharing your different perspectives, but also your stories so that we can break the taboo of menopause.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you both as well. I've definitely learnt so much. It's definitely a topic that needs to be spoken about more and make it less taboo. And thank you to our listeners for joining us this week. Please make sure you're following our podcast on Spotify and feel free to give it a rating and review as well.
So keep your eyes peeled for our next guest and the episode which will be dropping next month. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time on Diversity and Inclusion, Satisfying the Tick Box.